Hi, this is Jessica Thomas, an entrepreneur, and thanks for joining us for another installment of Ask Mark. As always, we have Marc Randolph, co founder and founding CEO of Netflix, here live to answer your questions. Marc has mentored hundreds of early stage entrepreneurs. He hosts the That Will Never Work podcast. He has many valuable insights and is always game to share them with our audience. Right, Marc?
Well, I'm certainly game to share, and I'll leave whether there are actual valuable insights to other people to decide.
We got a number of questions sent in via social already, and please pop any other questions into the chat and we'll try to get to them as we roll along. So let's get started. Our first question comes from Bryce, who asks, what are the most critical elements to think about when you're bringing on co-founders or important early team members?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Because one of the things you quickly learn is that you can't do this yourself. They're so valuable having people around you. And don't worry, I will back into answering your question. Uh, but there's a reason why having a multiple person founding team is generally more successful, more stable. Number one is you can divide and conquer. You can have someone who complements your particular expertise. For example, I come from a marketing background. I come from a business side. I couldn't code a hello world if my life depended on it. And so I pair myself up with someone who have the technical expertise. If the company I was thinking about starting was very, very focused, for example, on sales, I might want to complement my background with someone who really understood sales. So in other words, there's a divide and conquer aspect. The second thing, though, is that being an entrepreneur is fundamentally lonely. It's some ways it's you against the world. There's things that come up where you sometimes feel, I'm not sure I can share this vulnerability with my team, this uncertainty. I have a question that I'm not sure I can ask them. And the same goes, you may have problems or concerns you can't share with your board or your investors. And so having a partner, someone who you can say anything to, is critical. So you can see I kind of neatly backed into answering your question is what I'd be looking for and who was on this founding team were people who filled those roles. It is not by definition who happens to be there early. It's not, oh, they're willing to come and work for me. I'm thinking very, very actively, how do I complete myself? How do I complete the skill set that I need? But critically, I think, is this a person that I get along with? And I'll use this analogy gently but firmly. It's like being married. You are with this person or people for better or worse, through sickness and health, and then specifically through richer and poorer. And if it's not someone who you know will have your back and is by your side, that you can talk honestly to, who you can say, I'm concerned about something to, um, it's a challenge. Um, I would think in advance about who you call a founder or not. And the only reason I do that is I know that it does create problems later. Um, you can say they were part of the founding team. You can say this person was one of, I mean, all kinds of ways to express it. But fundamentally, I think companies have founders. And these are generally the people who have this original concept, who step up at the very, very beginning, who take emotional and tactical leadership in getting this nascent idea born. I think are the ones who bear this title. But that's a fast and loose one. That's how I think about who I get on at the beginning. Not to mention, of course, all the scores of general skills you want. You know, flexibility, judgment, persistence, humor that you're looking for in this flexibility in this founding team. I could go on forever about this, but I think I've given you enough to chew on. Um, Hopefully that helps.
I'm sure it does. Our next question is from Stella, who says, our business has survived several huge challenges, but I'm still feeling anxiety about potential growth or just breaking even. How do you handle anxiety about the unknown?
I thought you were going to ask whether anxiety was normal, and I was going to go, hey, or whether it goes away. And the answer is no. In my opinion, it never goes away. Um, I'm always anxious, but I'm not necessarily always anxious in the bad way, where that gnawing pit in your stomach where you just feel sick all the time. I mean, part of what I think makes for a successful entrepreneur is always thinking ahead, thinking what could go wrong. All right, there's 10 things go wrong. What would I do in each of those 10 cases? What could go right? How will I take advantage of those things if they go my way? And so it's kind of worrying, but it's also kind of thinking about it. The single biggest thing that I do to keep this from tearing me apart is I get out of the office. And when I kind of look back at all the skills of entrepreneurship, I think that's almost one of the hardest, but it's one of the most important. I mean, and you said you've had all these tough calls. You've been doing it for a while, and there's this feeling that if you're not on it continually all the time, that something's going to slip, something's going to drop, something's going to break. But if you can't learn how to detach, at least for brief periods, it will chew you up. I mean, you have to be able to sleep. You have to be able to eat. You have to be able to maintain a relationship with your friends and with your family. And that only comes from learning this discipline of walking away at times. Um, and a couple of things that I do. I mean, I think I've talked a lot before, and people who know me, I'm a big outdoors guy, and moving, taking time and doing something which is live in the moment. In other words, doesn't permit you to think about the future or dwell on the past, but you have to be right there. I find is a tremendous way to clear my head and then clear that knot from my stomach. I mean, I do things like, mountain biking. You got to focus what you're doing, skiing, climbing. That may not be for you, but there are other things you can do that. Solving a Wordle kind of requires you to be in the moment at the time. Those are really, really great ones. The second one I sometimes will do is, I'm a big believer in this kind of time blocking, and I set aside these big chunks of time for what I call deep work. But it's where I put away my phone, where I turn off my email, where I really work on a blank screen of thinking through a single project. I find that tends to let the crisis du jour fade into the background. That the thing that does chew me up is that feeling of one thing after another coming at me. And if I can turn that off for a bit, I find that really helps. Listen, the bottom line is it's not going to go away. No matter how big the company is, more successful, you'll always have that pressure. So you have to figure out a way now to learn how to address it and allow you to have a life and have a business at the same time.
Right. That's great advice. Our next question is from Joe, who says, I have a construction business and growth is stagnant. At this point, I feel like all of my efforts are for nothing. Any advice on what I should do?
Do something different. Break the mold. Step out. I mean, part of this, listen, without knowing any of the details, it's really hard to say. I mean, certainly if you had a restaurant and you were coming to me in April of 2020 and saying, there's no one coming into my restaurant, you doesn't take a genius to understand why no one's coming into your restaurant. And that makes it clear to say, I have to do something different. I've got to begin selling to go, or I've got to begin doing something else. And so part of the skill for you is going to be making this judgment about why is it stagnant? Is it a market condition? Is it a competitive situation? Did you misjudge how much demand there would actually be for this product and service? Because you're going to have to make this decision about, do I be patient? Is this one of those things where it's right on the cusp of happening? Or is now the time when I have to, I'm not going to say pivot, I'm going to say experiment. Now is the time to try maybe doing some different approach. Again, not knowing what aspect of the trades you're in here, I can't be more specific than that, but you have to force yourself to try things. I mean, you always, as an entrepreneur, are always trying new things just to make sure you understand what customers truly want. But especially when things slow down, and especially when you're starting to get that little voice in the back of your head that says, uh-oh, this may not be working the way I want it to, that it becomes crucial to begin trying something different. And you don't need to abandon your day job. You don't need to abandon your core proposition. Just make sure you allocate some time each cycle, whether it's a week or month, to trying some new approach, some new business, some new service you thought you might be able to add, some new category you might be able to do construction in. That's all I can really suggest, because there is no simple formula that says, oh, don't worry, it will come. That kills you.
Great. Our next question is from Teo, who says, at what point should an entrepreneur leave the critical but rudimentary tasks of the business to other people so that they can concentrate on scaling? What advice do you have for giving up control?
Oh, my advice is give it up as soon as you can. I mean, from the very beginning, it's giving up control. Actually, you can see I'm kind of doing this thing where I'm staring off into space, because I'm thinking it's actually a very sophisticated question, because there is a transition. This is one of those, what's it called? Cognitive dissonance, where two things you hold to be correct conflict with each other. And one of them certainly is that one of the huge advantages you have as a startup is that every single person is grossly overqualified for their job, including you. And that one of the big things you can do, which your larger, better funded competitors can't do, is have superstar players in every position, making sure that everything gets done perfectly. And sometimes that has to be you. But fundamentally, what allows you to grow, what allows you to scale, what allows you to make forward progress is recognizing that this is absolutely an 80-20 business, that you should be spending 80% of your time on 20% of the problem set. And the skill set is, excuse me, the skill is, what is the 20% that best is suited for what I can bring to bear on it, multiplied by what is the 20% that if I get those right, all the rest of the things go away. And doing both of those things simultaneously is important. I mean, my culture has always been about, this freedom and responsibility, as it's now famously called, where from the very beginning, I'm bringing people in with me and saying, this is your area. I trust you to get this done. I am not going to second guess you. I'm not going to supervise you. I'm not going to dig in the details. I'm going to say that in a month from now, when we're ready to launch, when we're ready to scale, you're going to have these things accomplished, which allows me to then focus on the things that I've identified are the core ones for me. So this is something you need to do before you scale. You should be doing this from day one to increase your chances of success. Don't wait. Part of this is sitting back and looking at all the things on your plate and saying, which of these, here's a way to answer it, and I'll finish this up. Your definition, when you look at something on your plate that you're trying to decide whether to give up or not, is not, can I do this better than somebody else? What you have to decide is, if someone does this 80% as well as me, is that going to make a big difference? And in many areas of the business, it doesn't. Just hypothetically, you go, someone needs to deal with our accounts receivable. Yes, someone who does it may not be as focused and detail-oriented and nail it the same as you do, but who cares? At the beginning, for the first couple of years, having crappy account receivable may not be the thing that makes or breaks your business. So that should not get your attention. Unless, of course, you are living hand to mouth on cash, and then having your focus does make the difference between living and dying. And that judgment is the key to making these calls.
So our next question has to do with giving something up, but not necessarily the same subject. So Kyra asked, what advice do you have for business failures? How do you know it's time to give up?
Gosh, this wins the award. This is the most asked question. And I almost want to reach out to Kara right now and say, do you really have this problem, or is this a hypothetical one? Because generally what I find is that most founders don't ever really give up. They're forced to. They run out of money. They decide it's better to sell, take advantage of where they are. But it's not like they go, oh, this is too hard, I quit. But in the interest of trying to be helpful, my definition of when to give up is when the problem either stops being interesting to me or I can no longer think of anything else to try. But my key, and I've said this before, almost my mantra is that you should not be falling in love with your idea. You should be falling in love with the problem. If you fall in love with the idea, give up at the first sign that idea doesn't work, which could be 20 minutes later, which could be a day later. It could be the first test, which proves your idea is a crappy one. But hopefully, from that failed idea, you get some insight into the problem. The problem becomes richer, more nuanced, more fascinating. And wow, you can't wait to try something else, which doesn't work. Great. You can't wait to try something else. Each time you try something, you're learning something new. And it's funny when you have that mindset, you have to drag someone away kicking and screaming. It just becomes so interesting and such a great puzzle. You can't wait to solve it.
Yeah. So our next question is going to come from the audience because earlier we talked about co-founders and bringing them on. What are your thoughts on solo founders going it alone?
It's going to be an all things being equal scenario. If you are sitting at home or you're sitting in your office or you're sitting wherever and you're saying, I've got this great idea, this great problem I want to solve. I got a whole bunch of things I want to try. And if I only had a co-founder, then I go, that's an excuse. That is a crutch. Do not let that be the reason you don't start. So answer one is, listen, if you are a solo founder or you want to be a solo founder, for God's sake, be a solo founder. That is not a necessary criteria. That said, oh man, it is so much better when you're doing it with somebody. So my thought about solo founders is all power to you. You did the thing that everyone dreams about and only a handful of us do, which is you did something. You started, you tried, you made something, you built something, you tested something, you friggin' did it. So that's my message to the solo founder. My message to the teams is, I think you might have a slightly better chance. You're certainly going to have more bandwidth. You're certainly going to be a little bit less lonely. You might even be a little bit more investable. But we're talking matters of degree. The important thing is to do something and not let, whether you're a solo or a double I actually worked with the team from Chubby's that I worked with for many, many years. When I first met them, there was 4 of them, but it's like people. It comes in all shapes and sizes. And if you're doing it by yourself, good for you. You're doing something.
Great advice. So our next question comes from Shahid, who says, what mistakes did you make when hiring people at Netflix? And what lessons did you learn from that?
Okay. The quick answer is I made a gazillion mistakes. Maybe that will be my next book, which is here. And it'll be 6,000 pages of all the mistakes I made hiring. But I did learn something, and I am going to lay some wisdom on you. It's impossible to know before someone starts. And once you have that, it's this incredible revelation. And lo and behold, that's the same advice I give you for any idea. It's impossible to know if it's a good idea or a bad idea until you try it. It's impossible to know whether someone's going to be a good employer or a bad employer, they're going to work or not until they're there. So relax. Listen, I'm not saying don't do the best job you can to think if someone can actually solve the problems you need them to solve, but you're going to screw up. It's impossible to tell how they're going to fit, how they're going to do under the circumstances you have. Your company's going to change. The problems you have them solving when you're 30 people are going to be very, very different when they're 60 or when they're 600. The problems you have when you're selling to distributors are going to be very different when all of a sudden you have to pivot and now you're selling to end users. So the paired piece, and this is the tough part. So number one is relax. Number one is recognize you're not always going to get it right. You're going to make mistakes. But once you realize that, you don't need to do 1,000 hours of interviewing, but you've got to own up to your mistakes, which means you have to tell someone, I made a mistake and you can't be here anymore. No, I'm giving you the insensitive, quick version, but you have to recognize you're not going to get it right all the time. You have to recognize that circumstances change and you have to be willing to say goodbye. And that's really, really hard because you feel, oh, this person did nothing wrong, which is correct. You feel, oh man, I own this. Well, you're right. And so you do the right thing to the person. You help them get the next job. You make clear to them that this is not on them, that this is not that they're a bad person. It's just a bad fit for what you needed. And own up to the fact that we did the best we could. It's just not working out. But you've got to then make that place. And as we say at Netflix, cut smartly. And listen, that's a pretty generic piece of advice, but it's a big one. It's the big one, which is you're not going to know until you do it. So go easy on yourself, do the best you can, hire, and let's see what happens. But there are some tricks. Number one is don't hire on personality, hire on what can this person accomplish. I spend very little time on what they've done, on where they worked, on what their education was. I don't care about those things. All I'm doing is saying to myself, what over the next 1 to 5 years do I need this person to accomplish? Capital A. In fact, forget it. All capital letters with an exclamation point. What do I need them to accomplish? Patty McCord, who was our head of people at Netflix, used to describe it as, I want you to make a movie of this person getting things done over the next 5 years. What are they getting done? And now let's back into what skills and experiences do I think that person needs to get these things done? And then make sure when you put together your interviewing team that they're screening for very specific things. You don't want them to come back and go, God, Mark is a great guy. We went to the same high school. You want them to go, you charged me with evaluating their ability to formulate a social media strategy. And I dug deep into that. And I think he or she has the background and skills to formulate a great social media strategy for us. They understands our market, and that person does that. And someone else comes in and talks about this, someone else this. And you put those teams together and you get a sense of what this person can accomplish, the things you need them to accomplish. As you can tell, we could use the entire live stream just talking about hiring and people. But we got some other questions to get to. But I think both those things will help.
So let's get to a question from the audience. This one's from Shelly. And you mentioned this earlier, your background is in marketing. So she asks, how do investors view a non-technical founder who uses contract folks for their tech team?
Well, the generic answer is you get very nervous. The best analogy I can give is I was talking to a young entrepreneur and he goes, I have this great idea for doing ebook learning to address literacy problems in Africa. And I go, God, that's a kind of interesting idea. I go, have you spent a lot of time working in education in Africa? And they go, no, I visited for a month. And I go, do you really have a lot of understanding about digital learning? No. Do you know a lot about ebooks and tablets and working in those harsh environments? No. Investors will feel the same way about someone who does not really understand all the parts of the business they need to build and is contracting those things out to people who aren't beholden to them. It's scary. They kind of want to know it's a key ingredient that you have it dialed. Again, this is the same answer now to about the solo founders is I wouldn't use that as a reason not to start. I would also hark back to a different answer, which is part of you is deciding what's key. Now, if this is a technical product, yeah, you're going to have a really uphill battle. If it's not a technical product, if it's a service or something that does not rely on the technology, and you're just asking someone to help you build the app to deliver it or an app to do a website or some other simple technology, for God's sake, you'll be looked on favorably as recognizing that you don't need to have this capability in-house. So the answer is, as the answer is to almost everything in life, it depends. But don't let it stop you. But the quick answer is, yeah, people are going to wonder, especially if it's a technical problem that you're trying to solve, that you don't have that piece to it. But again, your initial experiments don't need to be repeatable and scalable. And so use contract labor to give yourself a sense that you've demonstrated there's a there, that you can prove it's real. And you'll find that might actually be enough to convince someone to invest in you. And more importantly, might convince great technical talent to kind of want to come work with you.
All right, so we're going to hit our final question. And this one comes from AJ. And he says, I'm always thinking about starting a business, but I never take action. How do I motivate myself?
Scale your aspirations to your abilities, which means if you're sitting there going, I've got this great idea for a new way to a new CAT scan device. Yeah, good luck unless you're a physicist and you have a medical degree and X-ray, whatever, all the stuff you need. Yeah, you're never going to start. It's too hard. Start small. Do something that's simple. Do something you can do on the side. Do something you can do after work. You can do while you're in school. People look at Marc. You did Netflix. 200 million subscribers and billions. Yeah, but I didn't. I did that when I was 38, and that was my sixth startup. And my first startups were like clubs and magazines in college and things where I got that experience of what it took to try and raise money and convince people to help me and experiment and trial at a small, simple scale. So if you want to do it, I swear there is nothing holding you back, but don't be deceived by what you watch on Shark Tank that I've got to raise money. No, you don't. Don't be deceived that you've got to hire a band of 15 people. No, you don't. You can do it all by yourself. If you want to start something, just start it. Just scale it down small enough so the mistakes you make, and you're going to make mistakes, are reasonably inconsequential. Don't quit your day job because you're going to screw it up and then you'll be broke. So do it on the side. Just start. Figure out something small, and you'll find out, A, you may not like it. More importantly, you'll go, this is fun. I'm good at it. It's not as scary as I thought. And then little by little, you'll accumulate the expertise. Okay. And Jessica, I'm going to take 2 seconds to say to him and to everybody else that if you really want to understand what it's like in a startup, you should read my book, That Will Never Work, Birth of Netflix, Amazing Life of an Idea. And the reason I'm pitching, I never pitch, out on paperback on June 7th. So check it out. A new afterword from the author. That's me.
Well, I think Don't Quit Your Day Job might have to be the title of your next book because I like that advice.
I love that. That's a great one. Okay, I'm going to I'm taking that. I'm stealing that one, Jessica. That's a perfect name for the next book.
Thanks everyone so much for all the great questions. And of course, thank you to Marc for all the incredible advice. We'll have a recording of this event available on all of our social channels if you want to rewatch and take notes. And you can hear more great advice from Marc on his podcast, That Will Never Work, and on his site, marcrandolph.com. Thank you so much and see you again soon.